There's a video that has been passed around a small circle of ranch researchers for the past 2 weeks, and none of them agree on what to do with it. Some want it buried. Some want it studied by every lab in the country. One of them told me he watches it before he goes to bed now, not because he wants to, but because he says if he doesn't watch it on his own terms, his mind plays it for him anyway. What you're about to hear is a fictional account inspired by the legends of Skinwalker Ranch, the story of 4 to 7 frames of infrared footage, a fence line in the Utah desert, and a single moment that made a room full of skeptics stop breathing at the same time. I want to be upfront with you before we go any further. This is a piece of fiction. There is no real research team, no real 4 to 7 frames, no real night in question. What is real is the decades of legend and atmosphere that surround that stretch of land, and that's a tradition this story is drawing from. If that's the kind of thing you're here for, stay with me, because this one takes a while to unfold, and every piece of it matters by the end. Before I tell you what's on the tape, you need to understand the geography, because the geography is the whole reason this story is being told at all. In this telling, the ranch sits low in a basin ringed by mountains, a bowl of sagebrush and red dirt that looks, in daylight, like 1,000 other cattle ranches scattered across the American West. There's nothing about the drive-in that would make a stranger slow down. Fence posts, grazing land, a dirt road that kicks up dust behind any vehicle moving faster than a walk. It looks, in other words, exactly like it should look, which is part of why the story works at all. Nobody expects the ordinary place to be the one worth watching. There's a homestead near the center, a mesa rising up along the northern edge, and a perimeter fence that runs the full boundary of the property, for strands of wire strung between wooden posts that have been sun-bleached the color of bone. Walk that fence line yourself, in the daylight, and you'd find nothing remarkable about it. Wire, wood, dirt, the occasional tumbleweed caught against the post, rocking slightly in whatever wind happens to be moving through. It is, by every ordinary measure, the least interesting part of the property, and that, in this story, turns out to be exactly the point. For 30 years, in this fictional world, every investigation that set foot on that land made the same assumption. They assumed the interesting things happened in the middle, the mesa, the homestead, the open pasture where the strange lights like to gather. So that's where they pointed every camera they owned. Every grant, every hour of manpower, every late night spent freezing in a truck with a thermal scope pressed against the windshield, all of it aimed inward, toward the center of the property, toward the places where the story said the lights like to show themselves. Nobody, in this story, thought to watch the edges. Nobody thought the fence itself might be the thing worth filming. It's an easy mistake to understand, even in hindsight. If you're chasing something, you go where you last saw it. You don't stake out the empty road it might have walked in on. That changed when a private research team, invented for the purposes of this story, decided to try something nobody had tried before. Instead of chasing a phenomenon across the interior of the property, hoping to catch it wherever it happened to appear next, they built a ring, not a metaphor. An actual physical ring of instrumentation running the full boundary of the ranch, mounted independently of whatever the interior team happened to be doing on any given night. A continuous belt of sensors and cameras running the entire perimeter fence, recording non-stop, whether or not a single human being was standing inside the property to watch it happen live. The idea was simple, even if building it wasn't. If something out there really was reacting to observation, the way 3 decades of oral history claimed, then maybe the way to see it clearly was to stop watching it directly at all. Stop pointing a spotlight at the stage and hoping the performer walks into it. Build something that watches everywhere, all the time, with no one there to give it a direction to avoid. Let the machines watch instead, all the time, everywhere, and see what showed up on the tape afterward. It sounds obvious once you say it out loud. It wasn't obvious to anyone for 30 years. For weeks, in this story, nothing came of it. The ring recorded a whole lot of ordinary desert, when moving through brush, a rabbit here and there, darting between clumps of sage with a kind of jittery, twitchy motion that makes for boring footage and an easy identification. The occasional coyote loping along in the distance, uninterested in the fence, uninterested in the cameras, just an animal doing what animals do at night, existing without any awareness that it was being recorded at all. The team, in this story, started to wonder if the whole approach had been a waste of resources. Weeks of footage, Dozens of hard drives filling up with nothing but wind and wildlife, and the occasional false alarm from a branch scraping against the sensor housing. Some of them, according to this fictional account, began to argue that the interior of the property really was the only place worth watching after all, that the ring had been an expensive way of proving what everyone already suspected. And then came the night the story is actually about. In this fictional account, the ranch was empty, not lightly staffed, empty. The crew had gone home hours earlier for a scheduled maintenance window. The interior instruments were powered down, and the only thing still running were the perimeter cameras on the northern stretch of fence, quietly recording nothing, the way they had every night for weeks. There was no one inside the property line, no one in the homestead, no one parked along the access road with a thermos of coffee and a set of binoculars. Every human being connected to the investigation was miles away, asleep, or at least trying to be. It was, by every account written afterward, an unremarkable night. No storm, no wind above the usual late-night drift. Nothing on the environmental logs that would explain what happened next. The temperature was dropping the way it always drops out there once the sun is gone for good, the desert giving back its heat to a sky that never seems to hold on to any warmth of its own. If you'd asked anyone connected to the project beforehand to predict what that night would produce, every single one of them would have told you the same thing. Nothing. Another quiet night. Another few hours of footage nobody would ever need to review closely. And then, according to this story, at a little past 2 in the morning, the infrared camera nearest the north fence line picked something up. Here's how the team, in this fictional telling, described what they saw when they went back through the tape the next day. In the frames just before anything appeared, the background temperature of the whole scene dropped. Not a shape cooling. The entire visible desert, the date, the fence post, the sagebrush, all of it reading a few degrees colder than it had a moment before, as if something had reached into the frame and pulled the warmth out of it before it ever arrived. It wasn't dramatic. If you weren't looking closely, frame by frame, you might not have noticed it at all. But laid out side by side, the difference was unmistakable. The whole scene had cooled, uniformly, in the space of 3 frames, before there was anything on screen to explain why. Then, in the very next frame, something was there, low to the ground, moving along the fence line at a fixed, unhurried distance from the wire. Not close enough to touch it, not far enough to be wandering aimlessly. A steady, deliberate distance, held constant, the way you'd walk alongside something you were studying rather than something you were avoiding. It's a small detail, but it's the one that unsettled the fictional review team the most, according to this account. Animals don't hold distance like that. They either approach or they retreat. They don't pace something the way a person paces the edge of a pool they're deciding whether to get into. It didn't behave like a deer. They bolt the instant they sense a lens, a scent, a sound out of place. Anything that reads as a threat triggers an immediate, explosive reaction, all 4 legs at once, gone before the frame even finishes rendering. It didn't behave like a coyote either. Coyotes duck their heads, angle their bodies low, move erratically when they think they're being watched, weaving in a way that makes them harder to track and harder to predict. Whatever this was, in the story, move with a kind of patience that unsettled the people reviewing the footage more than any sudden movement could have. There was no erratic weaving, no sudden stop and start, just a slow, even pace along the wire, as though it had somewhere to be and no particular urgency about getting there. 4 to 7 frames. That's how long it held. Present, steady, tracing the fence line frame after frame, at that same fixed distance the whole time, never once closing the gap, never once drifting further away. And then, between one frame and the next, gone. No blur. No fade, no half-departed shape caught mid-exit, the kind of ghosting you'd expect from something moving quickly out of frame while the shutter was still open. One frame it was there. The next frame, the desert was simply empty again, and the background temperature had already returned to normal, instantly, without the slow bleed of heat you'd expect from any ordinary cooling and rewarming. Heat doesn't behave that way. It doesn't switch on and off. It seeps. It bleeds. It takes its time returning to a space the way it took its time leaving. This didn't. This just reset, the way you'd expect a screen to reset, not a physical environment. According to this fictional account, one member of the review team described the moment the shape disappeared in a phrase that stuck with everyone else in the room. He said it looked like it left the second it realized it had been seen. Nobody laughed when he said it. Nobody offered an easy correction. According to the story, the room just sat there in the glow of the monitor for a long moment before anyone spoke at all. Nobody in the room had an easy answer for that. Not because they wanted the story to be true. Most of them, by their own account, had spent years hoping to debunk exactly this kind of claim, had built careers and reputations on being the person who finally explained away the legend rather than the person who added to it. But because the tape didn't behave like the things they knew how to explain, they ran through the usual list according to this story. Lens flare, insect on the sensor, a reflection off the fence wire catching moonlight at an odd angle, a software artifact from a compression algorithm. One by one, in this fictional account, each explanation failed to account for some part of what they'd seen. If you enjoyed it, let me know in the comments what part got under your skin the most. The cold that arrived before the shape did, the way it held its distance instead of running, or that one impossible frame where the temperature snapped back like nothing had ever been there at all. And if you've got your own theory about what a story like this one is really circling around, what it is that people are actually afraid of when they tell each other stories about empty land and things that walk fence lines in the dark, I'd genuinely like to hear it. Sometimes the best part of a story like this isn't the ending. It's what everyone brings to it afterward.